So I want to talk a little bit about today and what we're going to be doing. So this is obviously a critical issue. It has become one of the really national headlines for our sector, not to mention our communities in general across the United States, and that is federal abuses of power, the use of ICE to terrorize communities, but also to execute the priorities of the current administration. And there have been a whole range of executive orders, attempts at least at legislation, although not much of that has passed. And then we have different states operating in different ways, and the nonprofit sector very often is in the center of all of these fights in protecting communities, offering services, and helping to navigate for the folks that we serve. So what I want to do today is we have invited 5 fantastic leaders in our sector across the state and country to talk about a whole range of issues. We can go back to that priority, that agenda list for a minute there, Robert. I just want to point out that we will touch on legal and policy work. We will touch on faith-based leadership and sort of the deeper history of sanctuary policy and the idea of sanctuary. We'll talk about government and governance and management perspectives for what a nonprofit may need to do to be prepared. We'll speak with some folks who are on the ground here in the state of California, as well as Minnesota. And of course, we chose our colleagues in Minnesota because of what they have just gone through and shown the rest of the country how you can organize and how central nonprofits and community were to that resistance to the ICE raids. And then, of course, we'll have time, if we can make it at the end, for a panel discussion. So that's the outline for today. We're covering a lot, we know that, and we're going to do all we can to get questions answered. If not, as Robert said, you will get this afterward. I will say, before I introduce our panelists, a little bit about the role that Cal Nonprofits has played in this. So as always, we are an educational resource. We try to give people some tools for advocacy, some tools for navigating, some tools for how to create responsible policy and clarity when information is coming fast and furious, much of it not true. How do you sort of parse through it and decide and figure out what is real, what is not, and in the same time be doing our regular work? How do we also do the other work that we need to do to navigate these moments? So one of the things that we did in the first Trump administration, shortly after the administration took office in 2017, there was a quick push to punish sanctuary jurisdictions across the country by withholding federal funding. At that time, City and County of San Francisco filed suit, and we, along with a half dozen other nonprofit organizations, filed an amicus brief. And that ultimately led to a decision, which we were pleased with, which was to say that, in fact, the federal government may not, under constitutional law, use broad withholding of funding as a punishment for simply policy that they disagreed with. So that was a good outcome that first time around. And as you no doubt know, that same pattern has repeated during the current administration. So early in the administration, back in January, I think it was January 20th, and then again mid-February, there were 2 executive orders that essentially did the same thing, targeting sanctuary jurisdictions. And again, there was a suit filed, the City and County of San Francisco et al., v. Trump et al., and we also signed on to an amicus brief there with a similar set of allies as the first time around. That was heard in court in December in the Ninth Circuit. It made its way to the Ninth Circuit. We are still waiting on further decisions, but again, it looks like it's going in the same direction, that sort of blanket withholding is not in fact constitutional. Now, that may be different as that case goes on, and so we're watching that closely. The case is still in court today. So what we started with was taking a look at how this notion of sanctuary can be used, has been used, and the deeper roots of it. And we are, of course, using some legal strategy along with just our ongoing policy work. I will say, being in California, we are in a state whose legislature and executive branches are diametrically in opposition to the priorities of the federal administration, and they're using that power, including our Attorney General, to push back. So we do have some advantage there, being the largest state, considerably powerful one in the country, and having our leadership aligned to protect communities within the state. But that said, there's still a lot of open questions. So as this is all playing out, the real impacts on the ground are happening every day in many communities in which we all live. And what we're talking about today is what folks should know, what we can all do, and how to be most effective, best prepared, and parse out what is in fact legal enforcement, what is not, and how we do our work. So at a high level, that's what we're here to do this morning. And again, I'm grateful for everyone taking the time to join us. I think we have over 600 people that originally registered for this morning, so welcome all of you. At this point, I'd like to turn to our panel and give a brief introduction. We'll ask folks to go ahead and come on camera. First off, we're going to hit on those legal and policy decisions and sort of the landscape, which is complex and constantly moving. Jeanette Sanipatin, who's the Director of Policy and Advocacy with CHIRLA, who actually joined us a year ago at our very first Trump 2.0 webinar. I want to welcome Jeanette and say thank you for joining us. She will be speaking first. Then we will have Reverend John Fanistel, who is the Executive Director of the Friends of International Friendship Park, doing work right on the California-Mexico border. I've known John for many years. He used to lead another progressive foundation, sister fund to the one I did, and has been doing a lot of work here, and will talk to us about the deeper roots of where sanctuary policies and ideas come from as an organizing strategy. Thank you, John. Next up, we will have Efrain Escobedo, who some of you know as the President and CEO of the Center for Nonprofit Management in the Los Angeles area, one of the largest and most resourceful of the nonprofit support organizations in the region, also strong policy advocate. And Efrain will speak about some of the work that they do to prepare and support nonprofits in this area over the last couple of years. Next up, we will have Primitiva Hernandez, who's the Executive Director of the 805 on DocuFund, and really asking about what they've been doing and some really incredible work in the Central Coast of California on the ground, supporting immigrant communities, offering direct assistance, support, resources, as well as strategies to protect communities during ICE raids and prepare folks with communications networks and other things that have been replicated all over the state and country. And then finally, my colleague, who is the head of the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits, President and CEO, Minoko Sato, who's joining us from Minnesota. She will be speaking, of course, about what they have just gone through, lessons learned, some strategies that they have certainly not only learned from community, but shared with community, and sort of what the landscape looks like there in another one of our sister organizations and states. So after all of that, we'll have some time, hopefully, to discuss some questions that will come our way. And again, thank you to our fabulous panelists for making time today. I will now mute myself and turn the floor over to Jeanette.
Everyone, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here to speak to you about what the legal and political landscape looks like under the current administration. So really briefly, I am the Director of Policy and Advocacy at CHIRLA. One of my where I oversee not only our local, state, and federal policy work, but I also oversee our impact litigation team. So law and policy sits squarely within my role here at CHIRLA, and I've been at CHIRLA for about 14 months, and what a year it's been, right, to be here in this space. But I really just want to give you, again, an overview of what the federal and legal policy landscape looks like under this current administration, and really just understand that, you know, it's not only had implications for immigrants and refugees on the ground, right? But it's also had major implications for the delivery of services and how difficult it has been to deliver those services to the communities that we serve. And so what we're seeing now is sort of what we saw during COVID, right? Disparities that existed before are even now more exacerbated by this federal administration's approach to immigrants and refugees under this current presidency. So like COVID, right? Many of our folks are just really sheltering in place to the extent possible, given that immigration enforcement has taken such a wide range of processes, not only on the ground, but also folks are seeing it immigration enforcement happen in places like immigration court and state courses, at USCIS offices, at hospitals and clinics, and many other places where folks normally convene or go to, right, to in order to receive services for themselves, their loved ones, or their children. We're also seeing attendance rates at schools drop because parents are just too afraid to take their children to school. So all of this has implications for the work that we all do collectively. In addition, we're also just seeing, as we saw in COVID, right, folks in terms of really trying to shelter in place or really limiting their vulnerabilities to immigration enforcement activities, we are seeing more and more disparities take place. Folks are not accessing things like healthcare, critical healthcare that they need. Folks are unable to work. Like I said, children are often miss school, or there's chronic absenteeism within our school system as well. And adults are just afraid to civically engage as well in the current society, in our current society. So all of this just adds to the disparities that we're seeing. But in terms of the legal and political landscape, we do have some wiggle room, as was mentioned at the top of the hour. Like, how do we address the issue of things like creating new sanctuary policies, for example. And so one of the things that we've been able to do at Chirla is to really work at the intersection of both federal law, immigration law, and obviously state law to determine how we can improve the lives of the folks that we directly serve. Just by way of background, Chirla is a membership-driven organization. We have over 55,000 members, mostly in California, but also throughout the United States. And to that end, we really work to not only organize our members, but really listen to what their day-to-day realities are and what their needs are. And so we work with that in mind, right? Thinking through how can we develop policy or improve policy to have meaningful and transformative changes for those that we directly serve. And this is challenging, right? Especially under this administration. But we know that we are able to pass state resolutions or laws not only at the state level, at the local level, and attempts at the federal level, within the immigration space, provided certain parameters, right? Under our Constitution, Congress has plenary power over immigration matters. However, in those spaces where Congress has not directly legislated, we are able to legislate at the local and state level. And so to that end, California has been really successful in being pretty inclusive of immigrants and refugees. And so policies like our sanctuary policy was challenged under the first administration, under the first Trump administration back in 2016, but our sanctuary policy at the state level, the California Values Act, did survive a constitutional challenge back then. And so, we've been very careful in the way that we craft legislation. We just had two of our bills coming out of California, one which was an anti-masking measure, and the second which was a police identification measure. Both were immediately challenged by the Trump administration, and we were able to survive a constitutional challenge on one of the bills, which is SB 805, the police identification bill, because we made sure that it would survive a supremacy clause challenge. And in this instance, the bill required all law enforcement entities, whether they're local, state, or federal, to clearly identify themselves when asked, and also wear uniforms that identify the agency that they are associated with. And the reason that SB 805, which is the bill that Chirla sponsored, survived that constitutional challenge is that we made it apply across the board to local, state, and federal law enforcement entities. The anti-masking measure did not survive the challenge or was enjoined, but there is currently legislation, cleanup legislation, to ensure that it could withstand a constitutional challenge. And in that instance, they are going to include language to ensure that that bill applies also to local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies. similarly as we did in SB 805. So that's sort of the context in which we operate. In terms of sanctuary, we've been able to also look into guidance from the 10th Amendment, right? The 10th Amendment ensures that the federal government cannot commandeer the resources of the state or local entities. And that's how we are able to ensure that things like the California Values Act and local ordinances that have passed in places like Los Angeles and other jurisdictions are able to survive a constitutional challenge because under the 10th Amendment, the federal government cannot commandeer our resources, cannot drain our resources, and we've been able to successfully pass ordinances and legislation to that end. Indirect within the direct parameters, right, that exists within the 10th Amendment. So that's what we're looking at in terms of the legal and political landscape. But the other thing I just wanted to highlight is that, obviously, since this new administration has taken hold of the White House, we've seen over 500 executive orders, policy memos, and policy changes made by this administration alone. If you take a big step back, over 60% of those directives and executive orders and policy memos have primarily focused on refugees. We know that refugees are getting hit really hard by this administration, and the other 40% obviously has focused on immigration enforcement and immigrants in general in terms of their statuses. And so that's sort of how the breakdown has occurred. The other thing I just want to mention is that right now we're seeing over 70,000 individuals in immigrant detention, and we have seen within the last 14 months, about 170 U.S. citizens that have been arrested by immigration enforcement activities. So we're seeing the gamut. I am also an immigration lawyer by profession and have never experienced a moment like we are experiencing right now. The other party or other parties like to say that we saw, as many deportations under the Obama administration. The key distinction is between what Obama did, what Biden did, and what Trump is doing is that the Trump administration is not conducting their immigration enforcement operations under any with any legal backing. They're doing it in manners that are completely eroding our Constitution. And it's critically important to understand, why this is so, right? We really need leadership from both sides of the aisle to step up to this moment, because it's not just about immigration enforcement or immigrants and refugees. This is really a fight for democracy. And so we really do need leadership in both parties to step up to fight for democracy right now. All of us are in this fight right now. What I will say too is that, civil society currently is under attack. Not only has this administration gone after organizations that perhaps they don't believe in their agenda or their political affiliations, but we are seeing civil society attacked in very measured ways. One of the first things that this administration did was go after loan forgiveness programs, especially for organizations or individuals that are representing immigrants in any type of immigration advocacy or representation. We're also seeing civil attacks of organizations that are being labeled as assisting with protests or being terrorist organizations. CARE is one of those organizations that has been particularly attacked. Shirla has been another one that has been attacked as well. But under all of these attacks and under all of the devastation and the terror and the cruelty that we're seeing in our community, organizations like Shirla have decided to stand up, right? We've decided not to back down, to continue to work to defend our communities, to continue to ask for the humanity and dignity that our communities deserve, and to continue to work to organize our communities. We've worked really hard to organize folks, for example, in the Los Angeles region that have been directly impacted by the arrest and by these detentions. We are working directly with families. We have a list of over 1,000 families that have called us for assistance or help, and we are organizing those families. We're not only helping them on the case management side, providing wraparound services, but we're also working to get them more civically engaged, to get them to understand why we're in the moment that we're in, why it's so important to become a citizen, to vote, to be civically engaged, so that you have a say in what's happening in this country. And really, out of this, dark period in history that we're seeing, we really are working towards building hope and resilience within our communities and within the nonprofit structures, right? We have many organizations that have lost their funding. And so at this moment, it's critically important for us to continue to organize, to continue to fight back against these really awful policies, and to continue to build this bigger tent, because immigrant advocates cannot do this all alone. And so we are at a moment where we are relying on our partners and our allies and other social movements to work with us to fight for democracy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeanette, and thank you for Chirla's work. Chirla's been a leader nationally, not just in the LA area, but of course throughout the state and across the country for many years. So we're grateful for what you continue to do, and thank you for sharing that. Hopefully we'll have some time to answer questions on some of these complex policy and legal issues when we get to the end. Next up, I want to invite Reverend John Fanistil to the screen. He serves as the Executive Director of the Friends of Friendship Park, and I have seen John speak and write, heard him write, seen him speak, that doesn't work, for many years. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those roots of the sanctuary, the notion of sanctuary in the faith tradition as well. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, I hope to add to the sense of solidarity by adding voices from the past to begin with. Sanctuary movement is most commonly associated, as we've just heard, with the legal movement that's aimed at protecting people vulnerable to persecution through cities, states, and other jurisdictions. But its history and roots go very deep in our national history and of course abroad as well. Perhaps it's most familiar to many Americans of my generation, baby boomers and younger, of the sanctuary movement that was launched in the 1980s. This was during the period of time, of course, when the Reagan administration was supporting authoritarian regimes, specifically in Guatemala and El Salvador. And as people were fleeing those regimes, the U.S. federal government was labeling them as economic migrants, or attempting to label them as economic migrants, instead of welcoming them as fleeing persecution and the harm caused by the civil wars in those countries. So the sanctuary movement emerged originally in Arizona, spread throughout the country, where faith-based institutions were welcoming Central American migrants and shielding them from persecution by federal authorities. Here we are 50 years later, much the same story. That spirit of sanctuary, though, really goes much deeper. And really, if you can think through just some of the highlight social justice movements in our nation's history, the Underground Railroad during the period leading up to the Civil War. Many faith-based organizations, in fact, here in California, were actively engaged in harboring and sheltering Chinese immigrants during the period of the Chinese Exclusion Act in the 1880s. Similarly, during the mass deportation of Mexican nationals in the 1930s. The same spirit was really on display in the civil rights movement, which of course was so powerfully rooted in the Black church, but also in the spirit of the Freedom Riders who chose to accompany civil rights protesters as a way, again, of attempting to add a layer of protection from persecution and harm by law enforcement authorities. And in that regard, I'm just emphasizing that, whether it be the 1880s or the 1980s or today, what we're experiencing is not something brand new. This is a recurring feature of American history, where authorities attempt to demonize and oppress and expel immigrants and refugees, and organizations of many different kinds step up to offer a sanctuary of some kind. This spirit of sanctuary is often rooted in biblical claims. So the Jewish scriptures, the Hebrew scriptures, of course, Their foundational narrative of the Exodus includes this commandment that you must not mistreat or oppress foreigners. Remember, you yourselves were once foreigners in the land of Egypt. The Christian scriptures are filled with calls to hospitality and compassion. For instance, Jesus' instruction to his disciples, telling them that when I was hungry, you gave me to eat. When I was thirsty, you gave me to drink. And when I was a stranger, you welcomed me in. And it's not just the Jewish and Christian traditions, of course. All the world's religious traditions include calls to hospitality to the stranger and calls for compassion. Just to cite one other example from the Quran, so give the relative his right, as well as the needy and the traveler. That is best for those who desire the countenance of Allah, and it is they who will be successful. So these faith-based claims, regardless of their specific tradition, are really seeking out moral ground, which is the underpinning of sanctuary movements more broadly, and is very much an underpinning of the sanctuary movements of our time, of our generation. Here on the U.S.-Mexico border, where I've worked for really 3 decades, we've seen this most powerfully with regard to the plight of families, as the separation of families has become so much a feature of U.S. enforcement policy and U.S. deportation policy. I'm not talking just about the most dramatic instances, like under Trump 1, where children were separated literally from their parents, but really the hardening of the U.S.-Mexico border post 9/11 disrupted historic patterns of Mexican and Central American migration. What really had been historically circular patterns of migration were really turned into one-way streets where Mexicans and Central Americans coming to work in the United States or seeking refuge in the United States typically found themselves unable to return to their families or to their places of origin seasonally or every so often because of the pain and hardship, cost, the danger, the threat of not being able to return with the hardening of the border. And so what's emerged is the constituencies that we all work with here in California, that we're all very familiar with, these transnational mixed status families, extended families that are really pursuing the well-being of their members and their extended family members by sharing resources across these family, the branches of these family trees that span our international borders. So if you think of this Mexican or Mesoamerican diaspora as millions of family trees that span the continent, the hardening of the border has disrupted these families and separated families from their loved ones for years, often decades. And this is a particular challenge for us who live on the border and really throughout the state of California. Many of you will know constituents who think of themselves as, transfronterizo or fronteriza families, borderlands families who are naturally trying to, make the best for themselves internationally, while the U.S. Government is attempting to, sever those transnational ties. So I want to emphasize too, just that this practice of sanctuary can be implemented or practiced in many ways. Most traditionally, we might think of a place of refuge, a church building or a community center. Now we have an expanded notion of a sanctuary city or county or state. So the idea of a physical space or a jurisdiction that offers protection is, of course, a very traditional and important understanding of sanctuary. But I want to emphasize that it's much, much more than that, because across the history of this movement, people haven't relied solely on protecting specific spaces, but rather they've taken the sanctuary spirit into the public realm. And by in some parts of Latin America, this is most familiar in a frame of what's called acompañamiento, accompaniment, where the idea is that you're even a small group of people, even a small group of faithful, or a small group of people acting in solidarity. A base community is language that is in the origins of the Central America sanctuary movement. A small group of people can take that spirit of sanctuary and offer protection to those who are in public spaces. So this idea of being accompanying migrants or accompanying refugees or accompanying separated families is a critical part of this. This is part of the work that we've done here on the US-Mexico border across many years at the site called Friendship Park, or International Friendship Park. And many of you may be familiar with it, but I just wanted to give you a glimpse of it. I'm going to ask Robert to play a very short video here, just to give you an idea of how across a decade, really from 2011 to 2020, we were able to create a safe space at the international border, even after the Obama and Trump Obama administration had built the first set of double walls at the border. We were able to create a safe space where families were able to gather through the border wall. So here's just a glimpse from a typical Sunday at Friendship Park. And Robert, I think there's sound. You may have to share sound.
Mamás y niños visitando con sus papás deportados, hermanos y hermanas visitando por haber estado separados, y unos compañeros muy conocidos, amigos de la iglesia fronteriza, como el hermano Lalo, quien voy a saludar ahorita.
Hi, we're here at Friendship Park.
So another element of this spirit of sanctuary is to emphasize that this is not something that people of privilege do for or to migrants, refugees, transnational families. The intent of sanctuary also is to create an awareness and to elevate the voices of those who are receiving sanctuary themselves. And this, of course, has to be done with great caution and care so as not to further endanger those who are being persecuted. But the opportunity, especially when people themselves want to share their story or want to present what in faith traditions is often called a witness, can be incredibly important and powerful. And a part of our work, I know you share the sentiment, is to make sure that the stories of those who are experiencing these hardships are heard, and that their voices in the first person can be known to a public that otherwise might be unaware or ignorant of them. And here's just the one brief interview with a young woman who visited at Friendship Park. Her name is Maria Zavala.
Hi, we're here at Friendship Park with Maria, who's come for the first time and to visit with her family. Maria, can you tell us where you're from and why you're here today?
I'm from Lancaster, California, and I'm here for the first time to be able to have the opportunity to see my mom after 3 long years that I haven't seen her. The only way I had seen her was through pictures, and this is the first time I can actually see her face to face, although there's of course that fence dividing us, and I was able to touch her fingers. For me, it was very emotional. It's very hard to explain all the emotions that were happening. Happy to see her, but at the same time saddened to see that there's a wall, there's this fence dividing our families, and it's very painful at the same time.
Yeah, so I just wanted to emphasize today that as we work together across lines of division, different traditions, different faith practices or none, different institutional settings and formats, we're really trying to create something that has deep roots. We're standing on the shoulders of generations that have gone before, and we're taking our turn. The time has come where we too must stand and be counted for. And as we build these cross-sector and cross-tradition coalitions, we're really elevating the voices of those whose voices need to be heard, like Maria Zavala. And so I appreciate the opportunity to share this little bit of history with you, to emphasize that this is a cause for which we're well prepared, and to emphasize also that we shouldn't abandon the moral claims of our religious traditions. The loudest voices in our day right now are those of white Christian nationalists, and when those voices are so loud and so powerful, there's a temptation to kind of wash our hands of religion altogether. But when we do that, we miss out on the opportunity to make the moral claims that are also deeply embedded. And the resistance to the white racism that is so much a part of our American history, the resistance to that is also a part of our nation's history. And we're also, we have these resources available to us. We've seen it on a recent display in Minnesota, the spirit of accompaniment and protection and sanctuary that was offered there. I know we'll be hearing about that here shortly. So thanks so much for this opportunity to reflect on my work on the border and place it in this larger context.
Thank you so much, John. Really, really appreciate the education on some of the deeper roots of what sanctuary movements have been and can do, as well as some hope for what this could look like when done well. Let's now move to the nonprofit leadership side of the work. I want to bring on President and CEO of the Center for Nonprofit Management, a longtime colleague, Efrain Escovedo, who, Center CNM has been a go-to for many folks in the greater Los Angeles area for decades, as a resource, as a guide, as an educational resource, but also as an advocate. So we want to talk a bit about what nonprofit leadership boards, individual staff leaders should be doing, thinking about in this moment. So thank you, Efrain.
Thanks, Jeff. Really appreciate the invite, and it's just so encouraging and energizing to be with you all. I mean, I see over 300 participants right now in the webinar, so that's very energizing. That's what we need right now. Jeff, just want to thank you and Cal Nonprofits, as you mentioned at the top of the webinar. You all have been extremely responsive to create these spaces and ensure that accurate information is getting out there. And I just want to thank you for always making Cal Nonprofits available to all of us whenever we've got questions, we need Sacramento access. You all are truly there as a partner. And to Jeanette and John and Primitiva, I just want to say thank you. It's an honor to be here sharing the stage with you all virtually and the tremendous work you all lead and do. I'll try to provide just a few succinct points. And Jeff, as you and Robert had asked me to touch a little bit around, what else are we talking about? What else is being impacted aside from, the existential threats, I think, that we've heard about from our other speakers so far. What else should we be thinking about as nonprofits? What are people doing? What's happening out there? So I'll share a little bit about that. Before I dive into that, though, I thought I would share a little bit about the lens that is driving myself and many of our colleagues in the spaces we occupy, which is ensuring we can protect and preserve the sector. Jeanette talked about that civil society is under threat, democracy is under threat. I firmly believe that the structural representation of a vibrant civil society and open democracy is our social impact nonprofit sector. If it is free, if it is thriving, if it is independent, then we have those things. If it's not, you can pass all the policies you want, but if we don't have our nonprofits, if we can't self-determine our mutual aid, our voice, our work, then I'm not sure we can claim a measure of independence or civil society. So with that said, I think that what's become very apparent under the shock and awe strategies of invading communities, violating civil and human rights under the guise of illegality and invasion, has been a commensurate dismantling of our safety net. Why dismantle the safety net? Well, I think one is it's been seen as a place that provides refuge for undesirables in this administration. That includes immigrants, poor people, people of color. And so what we've seen is rollbacks. Even if the courts have undone some of those rollbacks, they have dire consequences when you cut funding flows and cash flows from nonprofits. So we've been seeing the dismantling of those safety nets under and beneath the sort of behind the scenes of all of these things happening. The objective really is that, right? It's take away the supports. Let's increase the vulnerability of people, because if people are more vulnerable, they're easier to target and easier to remove. I think nonprofits are being resilient, and I'll share some of the ways that nonprofits are being resilient. But before I do that, I will say all of the things that I'll share, right, as far as what nonprofits are doing, what we could be thinking about, is it needs to have a horizon. So what are we preparing for? Are we preparing for hunker down for the next 6 months, hunker down for the rest of the year? The advice I would share is I think a more realistic, probably optimistic. My team and colleagues always say I'm a little too optimistic with things sometimes, but I have faith and hope, so I can't avoid that. Is a 5-year horizon. I think that the biggest mistake folks could make at this moment is to think that the scenarios you're planning and the strategies you're thinking about to preserve your programs, your nonprofit, the assets for community is a even shorter exercise. What we have seen is a fundamental shift of the line of the philosophies of government. I don't think that a change in administration will create a rubber band effect where things will snap back to how they were pre 2024. I think we're in for a long haul, and it will take a long time for the damage to be undone. So 5-year horizon is probably something that is more manageable and more realistic. And so what would you apply a 5-year horizon to? I think one, I would share risk assessment is critical right now, and it doesn't mean check in with your staff and see how things are going. It's look for the tools, do formal risk assessment in a few areas, right? What are the areas that are making organizations vulnerable to targeting or subject to potential challenges, anti-discrimination, or even just agency challenges with regard to your execution of contracts. So programmatic risk assessments. Public Counsel has done a Herculean and I think just extremely commendable job at being a resource and helping organizations conduct audits on their languages. Where are you at risk of potential anti-discrimination allegations? They've got some great tools there. Our friends at Alliance for Justice and Boulder Advocacy have put out some great risk assessment tools on how are you managing your advocacy. We can still advocate. We can still have a voice for our communities, but it is definitely regulated. And so tools like that Boulder Advocacy have are critical. It's just a simple checklist, right? What do you got? What do you not? The other are more scary. I think the other major aspect, particularly for our nonprofit partners that are directly serving immigrant and refugee communities, or that are directly engaging in saving our democracy by protesting and demonstrating, security and safety has been one of the major risks. I'm sure many of you have heard stories of organizations that have been vandalized, that are being targeted for hate speech, death threats. And so security has been big. Many funders have moved to try and provide funding for organizations to increase the physical security of their facilities. Some even, unfortunately, to try and support nonprofit leaders that are targets and increasing security at their homes and for their families as well. Staff safety has been also a concern when we see the escalation of activity on the ground of suppressive efforts to really quell any type of free speech demonstration. When staff is out there on behalf of the organization, we have to think about what does that mean? What are we asking staff to sacrifice for it? And is this a personal sacrifice or a mission sacrifice? And how are we ensuring their safety? What if something happens to that staff member who has a family? What is the organization's responsibility in protecting that family if that's the case? And so that has been something for organizations to focus on as well. And then finally, whether you're a directly impacted organization or an allied organization, I think right now the fear, stress, anger, whatever you're feeling is another form of attack that is really debilitating our sector. And so wellness, mental health, we've tried to up offerings around that and bring some of that wisdom in and connect people to those types of resources. The third point that I will share that is probably not the funnest one. It's not the one that's out there and really energizes you. But if our job is to protect what we have built for our communities through nonprofits, business model resilience and continuity is a must. Everyone in this time, not just because of direct threats to the administration, but because we have seen responses have varied across the philanthropic sector in terms of how they're responding to the threats they perceive, or even the funding from our local governments, who policy-wise may be very aligned, but financially may be a different story. Looking at and stress testing our business model. Where is our revenue coming from? How solid is it? What are we looking at? If we had to shift, what could those look like? So what that's looked like is scenario planning as far as programmatic impacts and how might you shift programmatically. The other is budget scenario planning. How do I set thresholds? If my resources are impact up to X%, Y%, Z%, how do my options change each of those times? And there are many organizations like Nonprofit Finance Fund, BDO, who have been putting templates out, things you could do on your own without investing too much money, has been key. When it comes to the business model, it's also the continuity. How do we continue our services amidst a myriad of different impacts we might face? What becomes critical to that is your board. And so at this time, it's less about how does the board go out and get more money for you. Always push them to do that. But it's also at how aligned are they at understanding that business continuity is critical. That means their governance and ensuring what happens if our CEO leaves, what happens if these different program lines are affected, and making sure they are aligned in what might come is so critical. And then lastly, we have to firm up where philanthropy is. You need to make sure and be having very honest and direct conversations with your philanthropic partners around multi-year outlooks. And whether they want to advance you multi-year grants or not, it is merit a conversation of where will you be then in 2 or 3 years. It's important for us to know these things, and many funders are very open to that and have been very transparent to that. And then lastly, as if, fighting off authoritarianism in an unprecedented way is not enough. We do need to carve out advocacy capacity at the local level to ensure continuity in our communities, but ensure the survival of our sector as well. And what that advocacy looks like is we need to be advocating at a local level to monitor system responses. How are they responding to their change in funding flows? What are they prioritizing in terms of grant programs they're pulling back and where they're investing? Sometimes local government, it's not in any way malicious, but sometimes they look to protect their infrastructure first. In COVID, many counties set aside what they called, strengthening the safety net resources, which went into strengthening their departments, doubling down and covering where they might expect resources. It's important that we are advocating and making sure that that's done responsibly. So this is your counties, your cities, looking at that. And then the way that any policies are being implemented, HR 1 is going to trickle down. And so how is the state of California going to interpret and going to implement that, as well as how will that trickle down then into the counties? I know organizations like United Way of California and other partners have been meticulously, count nonprofits as well, really tracking how is California reading and reacting to what is coming down with HR 1, and what does that mean in terms of not just our communities, but partnerships with our nonprofit sector and investments with our nonprofit sector. Those are just some practical points, and happy to share more. But I try to bring things of like, what's your laundry list? There's so much going on. I know we all feel like it's a never-ending battle, but glad to be here, and thanks for letting me share, Jeff.
Great. Thank you so much, Efrain, for all the work that CNM continues to do, and some of those really practical resources. We'll make sure that those are also distributed to everybody here on and everyone who registered. So thank you very much. And I'm glad you ended a little bit on the local and regional and advocacy piece, because I want to now bring Primitiva Hernandez from 805 and DocuFund online. You know, 805 and DocuFund really emerged out of a disaster response framework and has become a leader and support organization for many, many communities and families in our region of the state here in the Central Coast, but also has been an incredible voice. And I don't know if you're going to brag about this, but I'm going to brag about you, which is that early in the crackdown and the ICE raids, went in front of local government and managed to very successfully be part of coalitions that release significant resources to help fix, to the extent possible, some of the damage done by the federal government in our local communities. So whether it's setting up networks or doing direct service, I want to offer folks a glimpse of what's happening on the ground here in California. So thank you, Primitiva.
Thank you, Jeff and Cal Nonprofits for inviting us, 805 on DocuFund, into this space. We are, as you were saying, a very small nonprofit that was born in 2018 out of the Thomas Fire and other subsequent wildfires that we experienced in the Central Coast. We operate and serve Santa Barbara and Ventura counties. We were born out of the ashes of the Thomas Fire, but as an organization, we provide direct aid to undocumented and mixed status families in the two counties that we serve. But long term, we advocate for systems change at the policy level. And more recently, under this administration, we really shifted our focus from disaster aid into advocacy and rapid response. From day one, we've been leading the largest rapid response network in the Tri-County region, so also including San Luis Obispo County. That's the 805 Rapid Response Network. We're going to include links to our socials in the chat for anyone who wants to connect. And currently we have over 1,500 active volunteers across the 3 counties. Started with training people to be legal observers, slowly growing into accompaniment and mutual aid. But because we have seen that the ICE enforcement trends in California and really nationwide have shifted from a department poorly trained, not respecting people's civil rights, we've had to shift to rapid response, to having patrols on the ground, and shifting from legal observers to supporting the community members who are being impacted. And something that is that we carry from what 805 on DocuFund, or how 805 on DocuFund started providing that direct aid, is that we are, based on what we have heard from other rapid response networks, is that we're one of the very few rapid response networks in California that provide a holistic approach, meaning that we also provide direct aid. And this again comes from how 805 on DocuFund was created as a project to provide undocumented mixed status families with direct aid during climate-induced disasters, because they were systemically excluded from FEMA, from unemployment. Essentially, we created our own safety net system. Same under this current administration, because of how our communities are being targeted, we created our own community safety system. We know that our community members no longer feel safe calling 911 or reaching out to any type of law enforcement with a new uniform, because of the way that ICE agents have been operating in our community. So they don't call 911, they're not going to report crime, but through 805 through the 805 Rapid Response Network, we have become a community safety system. We've built this infrastructure to protect our communities, and we're doing it in a holistic way, working in coalition. So 805 Undocumented leads a tri-county coalition of nearly 200 community members that represent different sectors. So faith-based communities, immigration attorneys, elected officials that are allies in the movement, advocacy orgs, and grassroots groups on the ground, all working in coalition to protect our immigrant communities in the Tri-County region. Based on what we are seeing. Many of you may have seen the news of one of the largest one-day operations, which was Glass House Farm in the city of Camarillo in Carpinteria. So we were on the ground and were able to connect with mostly all of those impacted families and provide them with emergency assistance funds. Each family gets $1,000, and we've distributed since day one of the administration, nearly $1 million in emergency assistance that otherwise these families would not have that stabilizing support. We also experienced in our region a 4-day operation in northern Santa Barbara County and San Luis Obispo, where we were able to document and verify over 175 community members taken over the span of 4 days during December of last year. So as many of us were, in the holidays, preparing for the holiday season, our communities were being targeted and families being separated. Something that we're also noticing that is happening in California on the ground, and this is because we've been in communication, very close communication with immigration legal attorneys, is that there's been a shift in ISAP appointments where they tell us that they have seen that those contracted workers that do their ISAP check-ins present themselves as very familiar people, everyday people. They look like me. It could look like any one of us, and obtain information from people that are going to their ISAP check-ins. Maybe getting information about additional family members living with them, like their children or their spouses, and then later come to realize or receive additional information that now they want them to bring their children to their next appointment, children that they before didn't have knowledge that there were children living with that person, and even being placed in deportation proceedings after that. So it's the increased violence and the targeted operations, but there's also the ISAP process, also detentions that we believe we should be calling them prisons, because that's how they're operating. And we have Adelanto, which nationwide it is the 4th detention center holding the most people nationwide. And there's also been detentions close to schools that are happening at jails here in the Central Coast. It's almost on a daily basis that ICE is being seen outside of jails, not your traditional transfers allowed or permitted under SB 54. It is they're waiting outside in lobby areas that are technically public, and as people are being released, they are detained there. Of course, I'm sure many of us may have heard now that ICE is at airports. We're tracking that and monitoring that situation very closely. We don't know of any ICE at California airports, but it could change at any moment. So it's important that we remain connected and that we connect with nonprofits or groups on the ground that are monitoring what is happening with ICE on the ground. But I also want to expand a little more on the advocacy piece. The advocacy piece has been instrumental for organizations like 805 and DocuFund who are supporting and serving in the front lines. We were able to secure historic funding from Santa Barbara County and some cities in Ventura County. $1.9 million in various form of direct aid to support groups on the ground that were working with the immigrant community. That was also historic funding for us because typically our cities and counties had not been supporting or funding the movement. But advocacy is critical. It's important so that we can also hold our local institutions accountable when we are seeing other forms of funding being threatened and threatening our sustainability. So that is a very important role that nonprofits can play, regardless of what size you are. If you have advocacy as a focus area through your nonprofit, and a lot of lessons learned that I want to make ourselves available. 805 on DocuFund, we've been working with groups on the ground in San Diego, in the Northern Bay Area. Some of them just starting their rapid response. Others already had one, but they want to revise what they're doing because they haven't seen nearly the same level of targeting that we have. And we want to make ourselves available for that. We're going to drop our contact info in the chat. And if you are looking at starting one, revising, or learning more about advocacy, we are here to support everyone on the ground and making ourselves available for that. Something that I do want to close with is just reinforcing what is unique about 805 and DocuFund and many groups on the ground is that we are firm believers that those closest to the problems are the ones leading the solution. So we have built our team around that. Many of us are part of those communities. Those very communities that are being targeted places us in a separate level of risk. But we do believe that those closest to the problems are the ones to lead the solutions on the ground. And that has been a strength at 805 on DocuFund.
Thank you so much, Primitiva. Yeah, the model that you said and the networks you built are truly remarkable, and I appreciate you sharing some of what that really looks like on the ground. Thank you for sharing some of the contact info, and I'll thank all panelists for doing this. We're going to go a little bit long here this morning, but it's important, and I know that folks want to hear more. So I'm grateful for all of this, and we will again follow up and make sure everyone has those additional tools and contacts. So thank you so much for your work. Our final speaker presenter, I want to invite Noko Sato onto to share a bit from Minneapolis. And of course, you all made national news, I'm sure not in the way you necessarily wanted to, but nonetheless, the community response there really has resonated ever since the very earliest days of those ICE raids and all that has happened. So we wanted to ask you to share a bit about what you have seen and learned and are doing from a state not all that far away. So thank you, Noko.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Good afternoon from Minnesota. I am just going to give you a little quick background about Minnesota in general. That, yes, like the attention was maybe unwanted, but this is not the first time that it happened to us. George Floyd was murdered here in 2020, which led to a global racial reckoning. In some parts, we have been talking about potentially that this administration may want these kinds of photos of violent protesters fighting against federal agents, potentially, to invoke the Insurrection Act. I mean, there was just a lot of speculations around why Minnesota. The reason that the federal administration gave was around this rampant fraud that is also tied to a nonprofit. There was a nonprofit called Feeding Our Future that worked with a lot of for-profit entities to distribute food to children, which never happened and became national news. Many of the folks who were indicted or arrested or affiliated to this fraud had Somali names. And Minnesota has one of the largest refugee population, both in the Somali and the Hmong community here, which also made it, I think, easier for this administration to launch Operation Metro Surge. I think it's really also important to note that while that was the reason why given to enforce such violent immigration enforcement here, was to combat fraud, but it certainly did not address that problem. But what it did was brought in over 3,000, mostly very untrained, masked agents with guns who certainly killed 2 people who were legally observing, has harmed countless of other people. And it was because of communities' mobilization, quick mobilization around using whistles and making sure that folks are alerted, both to bring people to the locations where ICE agents were located to document their harm, but also for folks who are not comfortable to be able to get away from those areas. And that was organically grew out, and it was really, really helpful. And any of the community sites that you visit in Minnesota, they all had whistles at the registration tables and opportunities to put up signs, et cetera. There was also indiscriminate checkpoints, particularly around people of color. Many of us were carrying our papers because you never know when you're going to be asked to show them your papers. And if you didn't have it, there was always a chance that you will get detained, which also led to a lot of violations of constitutional protections, certainly around assembly and speech, but also around due process against citizens, people with legal status, not just undocumented Minnesotans. Elected officials, for example, couldn't even access the Whipple building where many folks were detained. There were lots of rumors and speculations around the inhumane conditions, which have now been documented by the folks who have been released from that. Philanthropy also mobilized and coordinated, pulled efforts to provide funding for a rapid response funding. Philanthropy is a little bit slower, and also could not necessarily meet all of the rising needs that were evolving quickly as Operation Metro Surge expanded through more than a couple of months. And now many of the people who were impacted are struggling with basic needs support, such as housing and food assistance. And, one of our speakers mentioned that folks aren't coming into the spaces where nonprofits are offering those basic services. So nonprofits are having to adjust their strategy and bring basic needs to community, which also means that they might need to invest in a van or kind of think through what their community looks like. It's also like it was a highlight in terms of how nonprofits and their work are interconnected. While the legal service organizations were very quickly, filing petitions, once they got their clients released from detention, although many of them were swiftly shifted off to Texas, these clients now needed access to funding and food and phones and IDs, things that were kept from them. And so they really needed to work in collaboration with other nonprofits, as well as mutual aids that propped up to make sure that clients were receiving holistic support beyond just legal support. Organizations also were just not there to protect the clients. You also have to really think about how you protect your staff, especially if you work with staff who identify as immigrants or refugees or non-citizens. There were also some staff members who felt very strongly that their employer should be, doubling down and making a statement around the impact of this work, but also at the same time, we faced 2025 when executive orders were targeting nonprofit organizations that continue to target organizations that might be standing up against the federal government. And so that really tested the boards and philanthropy leaders who tend to be more risk averse. It also led to a lot of burnout. It is leading to a lot of burnout, not just for leaders, but certainly for leaders, but also for frontline workers who are working day in and out to make sure that their clients are being supported. As a state association, we also had to figure out what our lane was. We are a capacity building organization. We're an advocacy organization. So we're not an expert in subsector. So we were always constantly looking for nonprofit organizations who were willing to talk to the press, to be able to sign petitions, and just keeping a list of those collected names so that we can make sure that those voices can be amplified. And at the same time, holding a balance between amplifying community voices, which of course, like community has the solutions and they're the ones doing the work. And yet at the same time, they were so stretched thin. And so we have to make a determination in terms of like, when do we bother these organizations when national partners are contacting us and saying, we want to help, can you have them fill out a survey? And we're like, no, we're not going to have them fill out a survey. And then also understanding the role of mutual aids. They did pop up. Some of them had raised a lot of significant amount of money, and now they're contemplating whether to become a nonprofit themselves. And I think there's more of an encouragement, if you know, to be able to work with nonprofits who are already on the ground. They might be a little bit slower to respond, but they already have the infrastructure in place. And then, you know, somebody also mentioned things around like making sure that you have resources around the nonprofit compliance, doing your risk analysis, doing security checks, not just for your people, but also your cyber security, you're protecting your data. Making sure you have a right document retention policies. And also educating your staff about what they can and cannot do as workers versus individuals if you are a C3. So attending a protest, for example, during work hours should be prohibited, but they just need to take PTO to be able to participate. And then I think it's also like the importance of documenting the harm. We are working with cities and counties and other economic forecasting organizations to really get a sense of what was a real big impact of Operation Metro Surge. In Minneapolis alone, $200 million were the estimate, very low estimate in terms of the impact of Operation Metro Surge on our economy. And we think that it's grossly underestimating. Last couple things is that, yes, like Minneapolis, St. Paul was a target, the Twin Cities, but this is impacting all of us throughout our state, especially in rural communities. There are a lot of areas where there are large immigrant population, and just because the news report has moved on doesn't mean that the ICE enforcement still is still ongoing here, and it's impacting a lot of vulnerable people without a protection of having a group of people filming ICE agents while they are detaining people. So the recognition honestly should go to the entire state of Minnesota. We're continuing to work on supporting all nonprofits throughout our state. And also that nonprofits are one of the most transparent and accountable and trusted entities. And moments of crisis is not the time for us to be strengthening our infrastructure. So if you have philanthropy leaders here on our call today, it's really I'm imploring you to please invest in the capacity and infrastructure of nonprofit organizations so that when crises like this come, which will come again, we're all prepared to make sure that we're going to be able to address the needs of our communities. And with that, I will say thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you so much, Noko. Some of you may know that Minnesota Council and Cal Nonprofits have a deep history of partnership along with several other states, associations in our broader NCI network. So we're grateful for everything you've done. And we frequently look to you to get some fine examples of how this work can look. So grateful for your time. I know we're going a little long here, and that's on purpose. We didn't want to cut any of the short, critical work. So I will invite everyone back on for just a moment. I will promise again that we will follow up with everybody with materials, contacts, resources to make sure that folks have those in hand. But I do want to ask each of our presenters and give you just a final word of things that you'd like to leave people with here. In the way of tools or advice. I mean, we've covered an incredible amount of ground from the legal and policy landscape to the actual impacts on the ground, to the deeper history of what nonprofits are doing in this moment, to the work that we all need to do to make sure we are as strong and powerful and safe in our work as possible. So I'm going to go in order of our speakers and just ask folks to share anything they'd like. And again, we will promise to also reiterate all of these links and resources to the full crew. So Jeanette, I want to circle back to you first and just ask if there's anything else you would like to share for our attendees.
Yeah, if folks are interested in state level policies or local ordinances, we have several samples that we're happy to share. We've been doing a lot of work nationally on the bills that we passed here in California to use them as models. So please do reach out to us. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much to you and to Chair Reverend John Fanistil.
Yeah, I put in the chat a few moments ago a link to a document, a Mother's Day action at detention centers in the United States and shelters in Mexico is being organized. Just 3 or 4 sites so far, but if there are others who are organizing already around a venue where you'd like to join in, please drop me a line or check out the document. And just encouragement to, again, build bridges across sectors and include faith-based organizing efforts, even if your own organization is a secular organization, can really pay off. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, John. Ephraim, final thoughts, words, advice?
Yeah, thanks. Just encourage folks to visit our website, cnmsocal.org. We've got a couple of resources. I know we've shared them with Robert already. A lot of what I touched on, sort of links to toolkits and things like that. And the message I'll leave is just a reminder for all of us that our primary fight is to protect communities in our democracy. Protecting our organizations and preserving our sector is part of preserving civil society and democracy. So we got to fight for our organizations too. Don't let them go.
Thank you, Efrain. Primitiva, final thoughts or things you'd like to share with the group?
Again, just reminding everyone that although we operate out of the Tri-County region and the Central Coast, I want to extend an offer to support any other rapid response network in California and even beyond. We're trying to make a capacity for that, but also we are always monitoring climate-induced disasters. Just because we're now heavily focused on rapid response and advocacy, we still very much understand that at any moment we could be faced with a climate-induced disaster. Not sure how many people are following what's happening in Hawaii, but that could be us, any state in our region, and that's something that we will also respond to. So just want to extend an invitation to reach out if they need support.
Great. Thank you so much for that generous offer. And Nanoko, I know it's just been a few minutes since you presented.
I know. You just missed me so much. Just echoing everyone's voices around the importance of advocacy and understanding your role, both as individuals, but also as an organization. And just to touch a little bit on the question that's right now being raised, in terms of protecting your staff against when they're going to protest, you just need to have a clear policy that says, like, this is what you can and cannot do. You cannot represent the organization. Don't wear, your clothes that represents your organization. Don't do any endorsement of candidates on your work computer. I mean, there are policies in place for that. And also to counter any attacks against the nonprofit sector, but certainly around our civil society, I think nonprofits really need to use our trusted voices within communities to really educate and inform our communities around their rights to vote. Getting out the vote is a nonpartisan effort, and I do think it's really important for folks to understand, especially when SAVE Act is looming over us in trying to tamper the voices of folks who should be able to vote. So just an encouragement about using your trusted, communities trust us, and I think we need to be able to use that effectively.
Thank you so much, Nanoko. Well, in closing, I'm going to bring up a slide here just to remind us all of who we've been able to hear from today. So thanks to our 5 panelists. I know we packed a lot in here. This is an incredibly complex set of issues. But I will say all of us, and I'm speaking for myself, my optimism for the long-term future of our communities, our work, our state, and beyond, our nation, is that we have been through fights before. We've seen these struggles. It is the nonprofit sector very often in the center of the progress that we see. So protecting our organizations, doing our work, insisting is our right to be at the table. All of the advocacy we do together. We are grateful for everyone's work and the hundreds who joined us this morning. I do so much appreciate you being here. We may well be following up on this in the future. We don't think this is going away soon. I believe Efrain gave a 5-year horizon. I think we're probably thinking in about the right direction. So we're grateful for what you do. We will continue to do our piece of the work. Please don't ever hesitate to reach out and ask Cal Nonprofits to support your work, your organization, to brainstorm. We like to learn from each other, learn from you certainly, and then spread the best information and strength building we can for this very powerful and important sector that we all live and work in. So thank you very much. We'll see you all at the polls. Vote with your mission, never forget. And we will see each other soon online, if not in real life. Thank you very much. Don't hesitate to reach out.